Does my audio work? You're not hearing shit? Is it too loud? Is it too loud? Because I have the fucking audio all the way up. I don't know, I've never fucking streamed before. Is that any better? Or is that still too loud? Any better? Oh, that was gross. Hold on. How's that? Oh, that may be a little too low. How about them apples? Ha, Apple Man. Perfect. I guess I never should have fucking changed it. Google knows best. Alright, I can mute myself for now. I really fucking hope this wind doesn't keep up. It's really fucking obnoxious. Can you hear it? It's like windy as fuck. But I don't feel like fucking sitting inside because I'd rather be able to smoke. And I'd rather not wake the kids up. That's impressive you can't hear the wind, because it's like, I don't know, I would make a Katrina joke, but I feel like that'd be in bad taste. Um, but it's really fucking windy. Type in the chat and let me know if this thing fucking works. I gotta say, my fucking wizard looks pretty badass sitting here on the Google Hangout screen. All like circular. Fuck, I'm gonna need another cup of coffee. Telling me to fucking mute YouTube. Come on, man. I'm not that stupid. There's like a 5-10 second echo, anyways, or a delay. So it would just be really obnoxious. I'd be talking over myself. Fucking A, I'm like stuck on this goddamn challenge and injustice on my iPad. It's really fucking obnoxious. I don't think there's fucking anything I hate more than energy systems. So is this shit like regular Hangouts? Can I like, if I were to like share my screen, does that shit work? Wonder if we're about to go in the fucking tunnel of doom. Hold on. Let me see here. Let me see if that gets reflected in my feed. Present to everyone. You are presenting to everyone. Does that shit like actually fucking work? I don't know. You say you think so, Jerry, but it ain't working. This is rather lame. That's okay. I don't have anything important to show. Ha, you seeing? Haha, what can we show people? What can we show people? Should I go to Space Sticks? Why can't I see it on my screen? Oh, maybe because I'm me and they don't want me to. Alright, anyways. That's unimportant. Yeah, that's all I was looking at the YouTube page. Oh, there it is. I'm delayed. I'm delayed as all fuck. Probably because I'm streaming and whatnot. Everybody deserves Space Sticks. Everybody deserves Space Sticks. At least once in their life. See, I was like way fucking far behind. Can I like even turn off the video on this shit? It's just so I can have the fucking chat. Video manager. What did that do? That didn't do fucking anything for me. That's obnoxious. I don't want to know what Space Clop is, but if it's worse than Space Sticks, there's nothing better than Space Sticks. Oh, Blake. Blake. I fucking hate when radical quotes and radical sayings and proverbs, can never fucking say that word right. I don't want them to follow me. Alright, I should probably say I'm like gonna be talking here, huh? Not that anybody really wants to fucking listen to me ramble on about shit, but that's okay. I like to listen to myself talk. And that's all that I care about. Because I'm an oppressive shitbag. Can I like my own video? Can I do that? Nope. That's lame. That is fucking lame. I want to be able to like my own goddamn video. Nobody's... Fucking hate Google sometimes, man. My Google Hangout window, like, it no longer shows my picture anymore. It's really fucking weird. Should probably wait until there's a couple more than 4 viewers, but I don't think I'll get more than 10, so I don't think we'll have to wait very long. Hey, the wind stopped. I wonder for how long. You know what's gonna happen? It's gonna start fucking raining. That'd be okay. Maybe it'd shut up the fucking crickets, which are obnoxious. Hell, use better words like fuck or shit. What's the delay like? I am outside. Can you tell I'm outside? If I go inside, I'm gonna wake the fucking kids up. Plus, I can't smoke in the house. And this shitlord needs his nicotine. Oh, I guess I'm really not a lord. I'm more of a shit pheasant. Yeah, not a peasant, a shit pheasant. Campfire Tales. I love it. Crickets, you can fucking hear the crickets. They're obnoxious, aren't they? Dude, I so have to change this to Campfire Tales. I gotta fucking do it. I have to do it. I gotta fucking do it. I don't know what to tell you. I live in the middle of the woods. That ain't my internet. That delay's not me, motherfucker. All right, how do I get back so I can start rambling? Oh,
Crickets.
That's not my internet. The delay, that is. All right, I'm gonna start rambling. Fuck. Fucking Google, man. Why does backspace like back me out of the fucking thing I was on? You'd think a fucking engineer would know how to use a computer, but I don't have a fucking clue. All right. Anyways, I was gonna ramble about shit. So where do I want to start? What do we want to talk about? We want to talk about Gamergate, which sounds really fucking weird to say out loud, but that's okay. And cultural Marxism and academia and all that. Where do we want to start? And I'm not going to talk about Digra, at least not now. Maybe later we can talk about Digra and why they're important. But I'm going to mention them because people have to understand where they're coming from. And people have to understand that cultural studies, which game studies is a sub-study of, I guess you can say, of cultural studies, which really is founded in Marxism, specifically cultural Marxism. Cultural studies really started in the 60s in the UK. Birmingham, I believe, school. One of those universities over there was really the start of cultural studies. And it started really with cultural Marxism and applying Marxist theory to culture. Because if anybody's researched Marxism, Karl didn't really talk much about culture. He didn't really give a shit about culture. It was rather unimportant to him. So in the 60s, it became really popular, like I said, in the UK, and they started basically cultural studies, which then expanded into the US, Australia, all that good stuff. Before we talk about cultural Marxism, people need to understand that cultural Marxism is kind of a slur in today's age. It's been hijacked, at least here in the United States, by fuck, I need to quit smoking. By people like the KKK or the Tea Party, which are really not a good analogy or good two things to put together, but it's been really hijacked by a lot of white supremacist groups and radical political groups as a way to slur the left side, especially the radical left. So when we talk about cultural Marxism, we need to at least understand that it pisses a lot of people off because it really is a slur to them. I just want to put that out there, just so we are aware. So anyways, and I'm a teacher, so I apologize. I'm going to try not to do this educationally, at least teacher on the side. But if I get educational on you, just yell. Cultural Marxism is really the study of culture through a Marxist eye. What does that mean? Well, Marxism is really the philosophy that everybody's oppressed, and that's kind of like explain to me like I'm 5. But Marxism is really the belief in the class system, and the upper class oppresses the middle class, which oppresses the lower class, and the top level class is in charge. Marxism is not a political thing. Karl didn't actually give a shit about politics. That's why he, I don't want to say founded, but I guess I'll use the word founded communism to be the political side of I'm doing it. To be the political side of Marxism. So when you talk about Marxism, cultural Marxism or Marxism applied to culture, you're really talking about oppression from the culture. So cultural Marxism is really the belief that culture is a way to culture is used as a way to legitimize oppression. Fuck, my cigarette went out. What does that mean? What does that mean? That's a good question. How do I want to answer that? Not that anybody asked it, I asked myself. So, I mean, it means basically what it says, right? Culture Culture is by definition oppressive, which you need to look no further than the Silver String blog to really get that, right? Culture by itself is oppressive because that's what Marxism says it is, right? Culture is oppressive. Anything's oppressive. Class systems are oppressive. All that good stuff. But why all this is important, and I'm going to circle back around on all of this. I'm just kind of giving a very brief overview. Why all of this is important is when you start getting into cultural studies, really that's where critical theory comes in, and you'll hear a lot of these SJW academics talk about critical theory. Critical theory was coined by Marxists, and is now being used by cultural studies as a way to look at culture. But critical theory also talks about, and cultural Marxism talks about cultural artifacts. And a cultural artifact is something that is produced by somebody that speaks to the culture of that person and the users of that artifact, right? So you might look at somebody, a cultural Marxist might look at art and say, what does this, yeah, there you go, Blake. Everyone equals oppressed equals Marxism. There you go. You heard it here first. But anyways, you would look at, maybe a cultural Marxist would look at art and they would try and determine what the artist was trying to say, and how they felt when they created that, and what that means in the broader scope of culture, and what that means for those people who enjoy that art. That should sound awfully familiar because that's exactly what's happening here. When you look at these academics and the media lights who have latched on with these academics, that's exactly what they're doing. They're looking at the video games and saying what the video game designer and video game developer, trying to put words into the designers and developers' mouth as to what they were trying to say and what that means about the gaming culture. Not culture as a whole, even though they do that too, right? But what that means about the gaming culture, we're misogynerds, we're neckbeards, whatever. And then what that means about the user, or what that means about the users of those games that were misogynerds. I put that in the wrong spot. But anyways, you get what I'm saying. And all that is really founded in cultural Marxists. And the point to remember is because cultural studies were really founded and deep-seated within cultural Marxism, these academics are really trained to see things this way. So when you question them on their belief, it's kind of like questioning a Christian, right? A longtime Christian on their belief. They've been raised, quote unquote, into their adulthood, into their academic adulthood, to view everything through this Marxist lens and through this Marxist eye. And that's just what cultural studies is, right? I mean, it applies the Marxist theory to culture. And it's fucked up when you get into things like video games, right? And what's funny is, and now this is where we get to the rambling part. What's funny is there's this whole other side of cultural Marxism, though maybe it's not another side, but another part of it, which is really like Marxist film theory, which actually came before cultural Marxists was coined a term, which does the same exact thing cultural studies or game studies are doing to games, but far less aggressively, right? And it's kind of fizzled out. Very few people, and I'm not a big film junkie, so maybe I'm wrong and somebody could correct me, but very few people continue to view movies through that Marxist lens. You know, it had its high point and then it fizzled off. Well, games are now having their high point with the Marxist shit, and it's going to fizzle off. So I said I would circle all back around on all this, and I will, but I'm just trying to jump through this all as quickly as possible and then talk a little deeper about all of it. But the whole viewing video games as a cultural artifact thing, in my opinion, is fucking bullshit. And as a game developer slash designer, at least hobbyist, an indie and part-time or whatever, it's highly fucking offensive that somebody would tell me what I meant to say in my video game and how my video game is impacting the culture of somebody. Because, I mean, not to use their language, but let's be honest, they're just video games, right? We fucking play video games to escape to reality and to, like, escape culture, not as a way of reinforcing this hegemony or however the fuck you want to pronounce it, right? Like, that's not what they're about. But but they tend to believe that's what cultural artifacts are all about. And it gets even deeper than that, because the belief is, at least to a lot of these Marxists, that those who produce the cultural artifacts are those that hold the power, right? And that's where you get into the base and the superstructure shit, which is, again, should sound rather familiar, because they're now trying to create video games, right? So to create if you start creating games and you start controlling the people who create video games, you now have all the power in their mind. And you can now control the culture. And that sounds a little tinfoil hatty, I guess, but it makes sense when you consider how they were, quote unquote, raised in their academic life. Now, to just continue down this path before we circle all back around and I bring some other people in who will bullshit with me, because I hate just talking. I'd rather have a dialogue with other people. Another point to clear up is academia and DIGRA. I already mentioned academia, right? They're fucking, these game studies, or whatever the hell they call their field, they're just social sciences, right? And inside social sciences, they're in the cultural studies. You got to remember that these guys are, I don't want to say looked down on by the rest of academia, but they're pretty much looked down on by the rest of academia, right? They're kind of laughed at and not taken seriously. So they're automatically poised to fight back no matter what you say, just because that's the shit they deal with every day in their job. But and like I said, it's so deep-seated in cultural Marxism that it's going to be very, very hard for them to step out of that. And now on the DIGRA side, why DIGRA is important. And I'm going to mention this and we'll talk more about it once I get people on to have actual dialogue. But why DIGRA is important is not because they're a fucking puppet master. DIGRA is important because they hold at least some semblance of clout within academia, at least within the social sciences side of academia. So they're important because they give these people a place to publish papers, which then increases their quote-unquote publication count. And it sounds funny to say like that, especially in reference of games, right? I put a point in my publication, but that's kind of what it is. And the more you're published and the more you're cited, the bigger grants you get and the faster track you have to tenure. So when you think about it, yeah, DIGRA is important, but they're not like a puppet master, right? They're important on this fast track to tenure. Now, some people inside DIGRA need the media. And why do they need the media? Well, social sciences and specifically cultural studies are kind of laughed at by the rest of academia. So they need to legitimize their voice, right? They need to prove that they're not a joke. Well, how do you prove you're not a joke? Well, you take the thing you're studying, which is essentially Marxism, and you make it real, right? You take that oppression, you take that hegemony, you take all that shit and you make it an actual thing within your object to study. And in this case, video games. Well, how do you do that? You get the media to convince everybody it's a thing. And all of a sudden, now it's fucking important. Now their voice, their studies are legitimate. And it's quicker. It's a quicker way to get to tenure, essentially. Anyways, I'm going to bring in Jeremy here, or Jerry, or whatever the fuck he wants to be called. Just because I like a dialogue. I don't like to just talk. I don't know how people just talk. Now I got to figure out how to bring him in here, because I'm not really sure. Jerry Appleman. Aha! Let's see if that worked. Thank fucking God I use Google Hangouts at work all day. Thank fucking God. Let's see. Did he join? Did it work? I don't fucking know if it worked. Google sucks. One moment. I don't have a fucking moment. I have 30. Just take your time. Well, I'm not waiting to get somebody else in here because I am absolutely sick of listening to my voice.
Okay, there we go.
How you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad.
What do you want to add to what I said so I can stop talking for a couple minutes?
Well, the kind of funny thing is I'm for those of you who don't know, I'm actually into the social sciences. My degree's coming in political science, and it's kind of funny to watch this because political science has been a legitimate kind of science since about the 1800s. It was another school that was actually started in the UK, uh, but it's gained legitimacy over the years. And as far as this stuff is just crazy. It looks like what something like Digra wants is to gain a lot of legitimacy, which I'm fine with. They can gain legitimacy all they want to, but as long as they're doing it by the right means, like all this, like we're looking through all this crap, and we're seeing circular citations and just basically a lot of, forgive the term in this case, circle jerky stuff, which is just not cool. That's something you don't do.
Well, yeah, and you being an academic I mean, you probably understand, right? A lot of people will go a legal card. It's not illegal, right? But
No, it's not illegal. It's just shady.
yeah, I mean, academics don't like it. You know what I mean?
No, we don't. I mean, I have to cite stuff from political science sources all the time, but yet that stuff's been vetted and peer reviewed and all that stuff, and it's stood up to the scrutiny.
Yeah, well, we've seen firsthand this shit doesn't stand up to the scrutiny. So you're political science, so you're not really social
Uh,
studies.
sort of. Political science is a subfield of social sciences because social science encompasses history, sociology, political science, and the cultural studies area too.
Yeah, and now my understanding, and you can correct me because I said this, so now I want to make sure it's correct. From the academics I know, have basically all told me social sciences is kind of the redheaded stepchild of academia, and specifically of the sciences.
Absolutely. It is the redheaded stepchild of the other sciences because just it's for one, it's harder for us to do experiments. It genuinely is a difficult thing because we have to rely on humans, which we know are absolutely fallible. We can test one group and test another, and we have to rely on basically the math behind statistics to back us up. Versus someone who does, say, a biological or a chemistry or a metallurgical experiment where they can get hard data from performing the experiment themselves in a controlled environment. Well, our environment can't be controlled, um, at least to a big degree. Like because I'm kind of getting into comparative in American politics. Um, it's very, very hard to get a control sample compared to America or anything like that.
And you're in Australia, right?
Now, I'm in the United States. I'm actually in North Carolina.
Oh, I thought you were in Australia for some reason. I don't know
No,
why.
no, God, no.
You must have said something about being in Australia at one point.
I must have.
Um, so then, my I'm gonna say my take, but it's probably our take on Digra and why they're important from an academic. Do you agree with that? That I mean, holding clout within cultural studies, you know, makes their public. It's like the difference between public being published in Science 101 and Scientific America, right? One's going to be a faster track to tenure than another.
Absolutely. It's like you said, excuse me, the more publication and the more, well, media publication and the more money they can get and the more citations they can get and the more everything they can get, that legitimizes them and it makes them an actual legitimate force in academia.
Which is what they're missing. From once again, I'm not an academic myself, though I know a lot, and I'm close with a lot of academics, and the feeling's always been cultural studies. If social sciences is a redheaded stepchild, cultural studies is the dude you lock in the basement and shackle him down there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, even political science, this year, I think it was either this year or the year before, was lambasted in the U.S. Congress because I think it was one congressman saying we didn't deserve funding from the National Science Foundation because political science isn't a real science. But we get bashed by history, we get bashed by sociology because it's like the XKCD comic where they had the purity fields of academics because in a sense sociology was the farthest impure while mathematics was the most pure.
That makes sense. So then
Yeah.
I wonder where cultural sciences is and cultural studies is on that
Oh,
purity.
it's even farther. It's even farther away from me. I mean, seriously, because political science has to encompass a lot. It has to encompass every political system. It has to encompass. I mean, because the United States itself is a subset of political science. But cultural studies is getting its own groups. It's getting feminist studies, and it's getting individual country studies. And I've got nothing wrong with something like, say, anthropology, because that is fascinating as hell.
Agreed.
But when I see a subject pop up like, say, feminist biology, I immediately question it. And I looked at some of the stuff behind it, and I'm like, some of this stuff's kind of cool because it's like, yeah, I understand back in the 1800s and even in the early 1900s that women were kind of getting, shoveled over because, hell, it was our society at the time. Some of their studies were kind of getting swept under the rug, or men were getting credit for the work they did. That's fine. But a specific biology for feminism is just weird.
I don't even know how you would have such a thing.
I mean, I pointed out, I think like 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an article in Scientific American about it. Either Scientific American or Popular Science. I think it was Pop Sci.
That would make sense, right? That's something you would
Yeah.
see in pop sci.
Yeah, and it was strange. I mean, it just threw every flag up in my head about it.
So, where was I going? I had a train of thought, and you lost it when you mentioned pop sci, because
Um,
I actually really enjoy pop sci, but it can be a little wacky at times.
oh yeah, everybody gets that way. Yeah, Blake, you're right. Political science does. I just saw your message pop. Sorry. Political science does really cross into the social territory a little bit because when you get into comparative, feminism is actually a political subset because a subset of politics, just like Marxism would be, or well, not Marxism, but stuff like realism and mercantilism and stuff like. Which is, I'm not going to go into those because that'd be a really really boring discussion. But it's because it operates differently than every other political system. It's one of the new age ones, so it kind of gets its own set because it operates by a little bit different rules.
So, political science was also, you said, also a product of the UK.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up because one of my professors talked about it last year during the intro course, and I say that because and don't get me wrong, I'm junior in my 4-year degree right now. I'm planning to go to the doctorate program as soon as I get out of college normally. Um, it was started in the UK and then it moved to the US. Actually, it started, believe it or not, in California. It took root there and then it swept across the nation.
Which is sort of what happened with cultural studies, right?
Yeah.
It took root in the UK and then it quickly expanded outwards.
Yeah, and it didn't really start until the 1800s. It started in the 1800s in the UK, and like I said, and it swept into the nation at the beginning of the well, because as a matter of fact, Woodrow Wilson was a political scientist. President Woodrow Wilson, the one who led us through World War One, he was one. Actually he's kind of the godfather of American political studies.
I would buy that.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
because
That
I've had to read a lot of his stuff.
that fucking makes total sense, actually. I lost my train of thought again. I had another train that brought me back to cultural Marxism and all this, this whole foundation layer of cultural studies, and now I fucking forgot it.
Sorry about derailing you so much. I can't help it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Most nights or most days, I'm much better at keeping my head in order. Uh,
Right, right.
but the past month I've been reading and talking so much about Marxism and shit that I'm kind of feeling oppressed by my own brain that I'm letting it take over.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, I know how confusing Marxism can be, especially when you're in kind of the American system. It's weird. It's absolutely weird.
It's and I'm gonna hesitate to say this only because given the current climate and the current view of Marxism right now, at least in relation to Gamergate, not all of what Marx Karl Marx tried to teach. Not all of it is bad, right?
No, it's
There
not.
was some really good stuff in what he was saying.
Yeah, it's the elimination of classes and stuff like that. That's absolutely fine. I mean, because that was what he wanted. The workers were the means of production, and yet they couldn't see kind of the end of it. So he thought it was time to kind of bring the workers to seeing the end of it, because essentially, in the structure where he was, the bourgeoisie were the managers, while the workers really didn't get a chance to see it. The bourgeoisie kind of kept them down and kept them poor and kept them oppressed. Well, Marx wanted to boot that system completely out, and that meant elimination of everything when it came to classes, even implied classes, like we have. I mean, the United States never had a formal aristocracy like the UK did or most of Europe did, but we've had kind of implied classes through capitalism.
Yeah, I guess which is where his hatred of capitalism probably stems from. I'm gonna derail real quick,
Okay.
but bourgeoisie, however the fuck you say it, I can never say it right, always fucking meant the middle class. I absolutely hate that term got hijacked to
Well,
mean
it
those in power.
well it did, because the bourgeoisie were the middle class. They were the managers. The middle
At
class.
his time, right? In Marx's time, they were. The term
Yeah,
is now used to mean something else, right? It's now used to mean the
the
top level
oppressed.
of power, the
It,
oppressor.
yeah, it now means the oppressor instead of the managers, the people who controlled the means of production. Which is why I found funny the fine young capitalists, their slogan, which was creating the means of production, which is what the bourgeoisie did.
That's actually really fascinating when you look at
Yeah,
it that way, right?
yeah,
Creating the
but
means of
that's
production.
what they're doing. They're creating the means of production for women in video game design.
Yeah, which is maybe why some of these SJWs, or at least the academic side of it, had a hard time with them, right? Because
Oh
they
yeah,
basically, if you look at that, that statement through a Marxist lens, they basically came out and said, we're going to be the oppressor.
yeah, which they just hopped on the anti TFYC train hard.
Oh yeah, and it makes sense when you look at where cultural studies came from. Now, one thing I haven't been able to figure out, and it's just because there's a lot of information lacking from the 1960s apparently that don't involve drugs, is how the jump went from like Marxism, right? Which inherently was non-cultural. You know what I mean? Like Marxist didn't give a shit about culture or anything. He was far more economics.
Well, yeah, because culture creates classes. They didn't want culture.
Exactly. So how do you make that jump? How do you make the jump from there to cultural studies, right? And cultural Marxism. You know what I mean? Like, where does that jump come from? Because in like an orthodox Marxist mind, culture is unimportant, right? Culture is something that needs to go away. You shouldn't waste your time observing it. You should spend your energy getting rid of it.
Well, yeah, I mean that's why the Soviet Union, and even today, even though they don't classify themselves as communists, they classify themselves as Juche, as North Korea. They were firmly, and North Korea still is firmly touting that it is an atheist state.
Well, it's not, but
Yeah, they don't say it is, but that's one of the kind of tenets, because religion creates class, therefore it's bad.
yeah, and maybe it's my head. I still have a hard time making that jump from, and maybe this is why a lot of orthodox Marxists don't consider like cultural Marxists or the Frankfurt School to be real Marxists. But how do you make the jump from culture is unimportant to culture is so important we're gonna develop an entire field of study around it? You know what I mean?
Well, I think they say their culture is the best and every other culture is oppressing them. It's that easy. You make the other culture the oppressors, and our culture is the oppressed.
And therefore we have to figure out a way to make us unoppressed.
Absolutely. Whether it's through, I don't want to say Digra is, but stuff that came out of Digra is kind of the voice of saying stuff like that. Even though it's sponsored by them, they're not directly saying kind of anything. I mean, because we got for even with feminism, we got first wave. First wave was making women politically equal. Now in second wave, you've got women saying we're equal we have an equal outcome. But now it's well, no, not an equal outcome, but equal opportunity. Now they want equal outcome, but equal outcome is kind of hard to do.
Well, that's where you start getting into communism, right? And that's where
Yeah.
you get it. When I look at this, and I'm not an expert, right? But this shit's always fascinated me. Marxism and political sciences, and right, like all this philosophical shit. But anyways, when I look at what's happening to games, I see like Marxists, and I forget what he called his workflow or whatever. Where you go from the upper level being in charge to the middle level being in charge to the basically to communism, right? You get to the post hegemony state, and I feel like they're trying to force that to not be organic, right? To not happen
Yeah.
organically. They're trying to force that post hegemony.
Well, now here's the funny thing. I mean, with their it's kind of saying right now the hegemony is purely male, and they're trying to say that it's male and that men are keeping women down. And you know what? In some cases, that's true. That does happen, but not as much as they're touting.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, because we still have equality problems in the United States. We still have some, but not. It's not rampant. It's not. It's if you put the work in, you get what you get what you put you get back what you put into it. Basically, I'm trying to talk tonight. My tongue's just going stupid.
You and me both. Which I guess brings me to another point I've been pushing a lot. Is it feels like these academics who come from right as we've established, and we can talk more about it if you want, who come from basically a cultural Marxist background, or at least a Marxist background, right? Like their whole field of study was based off Marxism. And then you have the SJWs who are for some fucking kind of feminism, right? Who knows what it is, right? But some form of feminism. They seem to have like this symbiotic relationship, right? And they're at a point now where they both need each other. They're both fighting a different yet same battle, but they need each other.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I can't remember who said it, but I saw it. I think somebody posted it the other night. Said it used to be academia was really, really right wing, and when I say right, well, conservative as in the little c conservative, and there's a distinction between the two because little c conservative typically means slow to change. Let's keep the old system and whatnot, and then the liberal side came in and kind of swept those guys out. But now that they've swept them out, they've taken over. And now they're installing their stuff. And liberalism is very quick to change. And it's not so much based on the Marxist ideology, and social justice, I don't even...
Let me I'll correct what I said, because I said based on.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the social justice side of things. From an academic standpoint, the very first professors who pushed cultural studies were pushing for viewing culture through basically viewing culture through a Marxist lens. So when I say based on Marxism, it's really not based on Marxism, right? At least not at this point, though there are still some strands of Marxism in what they do. But that's where it started, right? That's where its roots are. And I can post the links if you guys are interested. And where that comes from. But it was a few professors from one of the Brigham. I don't know, I'm terrible.
I think Birmingham is the name of
Birmingham.
it. Yeah, Birmingham. Yeah, the Birmingham University.
Yeah, I'm terrible with English names. Where professors there really started the cultural studies and the cultural sciences, which was viewing culture through Marxism, right? Through the Marxist lens, cultural Marxism, all that good stuff.
Sorta. I mean, because Marxism had an easier spread to the UK just because it was closer. The United States has always been kind of shielded from it because, let's face it, we've got two oceans between us.
Yes.
And that can really interfere with stuff. That's why, I mean, even the APSA, the American Political Science Association, is vehemently dug into a lot of obviously American political science. And it's not even dug into stuff like international relations as much.
Repeat that. You cut out on me. I
Oh,
don't
sorry.
cut out on everybody else, but you did on me.
Yeah, because you kind of cut there. It was, we had two oceans, but I think it was we had two oceans between us, and even stuff like the American Political Science Association was kind of shielded from getting any big ideas from Karl Marx. We have to study it because because it ended up creating a political system under Lenin and under Lenin more than anybody else. Trotsky would have helped, but Trotsky got assassinated by Stalin. But
Yeah, well, it let what do they call that? Marxist Lenin or whatever the hell that political structure is called.
it was just called Lenin. It was still called communism, but it was just Lenin's take on communism, which worked. That was the funny thing. Lenin's style worked. He got the kinks worked out within the first few years. I mean, yeah, it caused a couple of famines, but it ended up working.
I love that. It worked. He basically wiped out the population a couple times, but it worked.
I mean, it did. Once they had the starvations done, it was working actually pretty well. And then Trotsky was supposed to take over, who was Lenin's kind of successor, and Stalin had him assassinated in Mexico.
Yeah, and then Stalin did his old take on it.
Oh
which
yeah,
didn't work.
yeah. And then we get into the Cold War era, which was really weird on communism because a lot of shit changed.
Well, yeah, and you can thank and/or blame Stalin depending on your stance on communism for that. So going back to academia and cultural Marxism, so we've established they believe their culture is the right culture, right?
Right.
That's our opinion, and the other all the other culture is oppressing them. That makes sense from a Marxist view, right? When you consider the class system and all that.
Yeah.
So then you start getting into the hegemony, and I always pronounce it wrong. You can correct me all you want. It'll always be hegemony in my mind.
No, it's fine. I catch myself saying it that way sometimes too, and I have to say it pretty much every week.
I'm a IA type person. I say, yes, I know who started Marxist-Leninism. That's just usually how it's referred to these days. Rightly or wrongly, a lot of people refer to it that way because Stalin had a lot of influence. Sorry, I'm referring to the chat.
Yeah, I got it up on my other monitor.
What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, I'm a lot like Jim in that I also say hyperbole, even though it's hyperbole. So hegemony, it'll always be a hegemony in my mind.
Oh, yeah.
So then where do we get to? I mean, we get to the hegemony, which I guess, this hegemonic masculinity, somebody had tweeted me this link. I actually haven't seen it, so that's a little embarrassing on me. So I'm going to read over that in a minute. But then how do we get to the gender side of things? But not only the gender side of things, where does all this Marxist from the academic side, and I'm calling it Marxism whether, this Malky in chat likes it or not, right? In my mind, that's kind of what they believe, right? So I'm going to call it this Marxism from the academic side. Where does the whole gay, lesbian, transgender thing, how does that all fit in with this Marxist view, other than oppression, right? Because anybody can be oppressed.
Well, I think that's kind of where it came from because, think about how things kind of evolved during the 60s and 70s when it came to difference in gender identity and difference in gay and lesbian identification. Actually, what's the term? What's the proper term? Sexual orientation identification. There we go. They actually kind of were. There were laws against, basically being. I think you have the sodomy laws back in the. I think they finally ended in the late 80s, early 90s. But it's hard to really say. I think it's just I really don't know. I really couldn't tell you. It's weird.
it is weird, and that's where that's the one thing I've struggled on, right? Like I've read a lot about this, and I'm struggling how outside of oppression, right? Where did this narrative of cis shit, right?
Yeah, that's new. That's a term I've only seen pop up in the last like year or two.
Yeah, exactly, right? But um, it seemed to have spread over into academia, right? You can
Well,
go to places like First Person Scholar or Critical Distance, who tend to propagate these academic papers, and you see a lot of this talk about the cis white male being um, the oppressor, right? Being the top dog. Where
yeah,
did that come from, right? It's turned into it's no longer economic power, right? It's now some sort of feelings power.
yeah. It's the monopoly on emotion. Because if you've ever kind of dug into what government actually means, it's that the government itself holds the monopoly over violence. And that meaning I can't go out, I can basically say that my state government, um, I can't attack it because, well, let's see. I'm trying to explain this because the monopoly of violence is actually rather kind of complex. Basically saying that I can't directly attack the state government and try to take it over because guess what? They're going to kill me. They've got way more ability to inflict violence on me. So essentially it's me being subjugated by them. But subjugation where I give up some of my uh, not all of modern Malky, I just saw that not all of modern liberalism, because here's the funny thing. The United States, whether you say you're conservative or liberal, is firmly in the world political perspective in the liberal camp. Versus the rest of the world where little c conservative is more feudalism, while more communist is the hard far right liberalism. That is the ultimate genesis essentially of liberalism. But now I've lost my train of thought too, so I'm sorry, guys. I lost my
I did too, but I'm now fascinated by this. I'm thinking about what Malky just said. Basically, I think you're conflating all modern liberalism with Marxism, and Blake hit the nail on the head. You are
Yeah.
100% right. You are totally misunderstanding. Liberalism as a thing, right? As a political belief, as a way to lean, as a belief system, whatever you want to say, right? Like, that's different from what I'm saying here and what
Yeah.
Jerry's saying here. We are saying that the roots of cultural studies as an academic field has its root, are in cultural Marxism. And you can look up the Frankfurt School. You can look up the, hold on, I got the name in front of me. I'm still going to butcher it, but the Birmingham, I said it wrong again, school, in the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, were all highly, 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 highly influenced by very respected Marxist theorists in the 1960s, and they helped shape cultural studies, which has very little to do with liberalism and SJWs and social justice and all of that.
Oh yeah, because there's even economic liberalism, there's cultural liberalism, there's political liberalism, there's many, many, many forms of liberalism, and as a matter of fact, even economic liberalism is capitalism. Period. Let the free market handle everything.
Which is funny in and of itself, right? Because a lot of these people in academia, right, at least in the cultural study side of academia, and I'm gonna say it right now. When I say academia, and unless I specify otherwise, I'm talking about the cultural studies academia, just because I'd rather not use so many words, right? But a lot of these people in academia consider themselves, or at least seem to consider themselves, pretty far left, right, and pretty far liberal. But they also seem to be 100%, maybe not 100%, but they also seem to have a big problem with capitalism because of the hegemony and all that.
Yeah, I mean it seems that, well, because that's the thing. Academics is weird because you can have very, very kind of conservative sides who are very slow to change to new ideas. You have some that are very, very quick to change new ideas, which is where the liberalism kind of stuff. It's basically that's the distinction between liberalism and conservatism. Which way is quicker to move? Liberalism moves quickly, while conservatism moves slowly. You know, conservatives don't want things to change; they want things to stay the same.
Yeah. I'm gonna try and keep this out of as much out of left and right and like U.S. politics as possible, just because that pisses a lot of people off. But I mentioned the Frankfurt School, and I think I can't mention that. Hold on, let's just.
Yeah, I'm getting those too.
You guys know how to activate the chat on streams? Open. Anyway, so I mentioned the Frankfurt School. I feel like we have to also mention the Frankfurt School conspiracy theory, and I don't know how many people are familiar with that. Are you familiar with that?
I am not, because I hate to say this, but when I hear conspiracy theory, it kind of turns me off to it.
Okay, so the Frankfurt School, and I'm going to read this from Wikipedia real quick, just because they say it better than I could, because I'm a terrible speaker, is a school of neo-Marxist interdisciplinary social theory, associated in part with the Institute of Social Research, blah, 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 blah. Right? So, like, the Frankfurt School was, in its own way, its own cultural Marxist, right? And there's this conspiracy theory that's been pushed, at least as recently by like the Tea Party, that the Frankfurt School is responsible for political correctness. That they basically dropped operatives in the Western world to introduce political correctness.
That really kind of sounds
conspiracy.
Tinfoil hatty, like really tinfoil hatty.
I 100% agree, but because I mentioned the Frankfurt School, I felt like I had to mention that I also understand it is sometimes used by radicals as a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I really can. Just because, and I genuinely, because he draws so much ire from the Gamergate side. Movie Bob kind of came up with this in one of his The Big Picture episodes on The Escapist. It is a conspiracy is a way for a small mind to deal with a huge concept, and he was more talking about things like the 9/11 conspiracies, and I know some of the Kennedy stuff was kind of shady, but the Kennedy assassination and all that. Nobody can take the idea that one crazy guy decided to shoot the president, or two people were willing to die for their ideology so much that they rammed 3 planes into 3 separate buildings and crashed one into a field in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and and once again, I'm gonna give the same sentiments as you. I hate to agree with anything Movie Bob says right now, but he's got a point, right? And it's especially true when you talk about the Frankfurt School and you talk about cultural Marxism, right? Like, or just I hesitate to say cultural Marxism just because a lot of orthodox Marxists don't like it being called Marxism, but it's a hard thing for the Western world to grasp. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
We have a hard time with the class system because when people from the Western world think class, we think India, right?
Yeah, you think the caste system. You think stuff like that. Or even going back to, medieval Europe and post-medieval Europe, you think the aristocracy, you think, the poor, you think the, whatever. We don't have a genuine class system, we have an implied class system, which is totally different.
All right, keep talking so I can
yeah.
help synth.
Okay. Well, I mean, and trying to draw this into Gamergate is very difficult. Well, I'm not going to say difficult because now we've started digging into the places where this ideology came from, which is hard to find.
Well,
and Malky, I will say this: Chomsky was kind of right. It does discourage looking into it. I will say that. It really does. But some of the stuff that people have come up with is just nuts when it comes to that. But hey, that happens. You know, sometimes people have legitimate claims and they get written off as conspiracy theory.
Which bothers me. Believe it or not, that actually bothers me because while sometimes something may sound nutty, I don't think that's a reason to automatically deny it, right? To like categorically say, I'm not going to take what you have to say because what you say is just a conspiracy theory. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like I have a hard time with that. In the anti-gamergate, and I hate to classify them all like that, but I will. I hate broad brushing, but I'm going to broad brush right now. The anti-gamergate people tend to pull that card an awful lot, and it really makes my blood boil. Or my blood boil.
Oh, if you ever want something good to read, kind of what what's going on, there's a book that I actually have that I had to read for a class. It's called Propaganda by Edward Bernays. It's really good. Um, but the funny thing about that was he talked about how you can make the public's opinion sway to you, and that was what you do is you induce demand. You make someone want to buy into it.
Well, see, now you're getting. Repeat that because I want to phrase my thoughts,
Um,
my words properly.
well, Bernays was a PR guy. He really was. He was one of the guys that created a bunch of the recruitment posters for World War One. He created some of the most famous ads in the world, like Lucky Strike and Dove soap, and you know, he's the guy that he is actually. I think the guy that that in if anybody in here seen the show Mad Men, Edward Bernays is the basis of Don Draper.
I
And
haven't seen it. I
yeah,
don't have cable TV, so I
oh,
don't know
okay.
as much.
But he's basically the best ad guy that has ever been in the business. And what he said to do was to get the public's opinion, what you have to do is you have to induce a demand for something. Like his Lucky Strike approach was their packs at the time were green. And so he wanted to encourage women to smoke because that meant, obviously, we know smoking is a terrible thing, but and I can't say much because I do it too, but
I was gonna say I'm smoking right now, but
yeah.
okay.
But since the packs were green, he was saying that one of his logics was that it clashed with women's outfits. So what he did was he basically induced a change in fashion to encourage women to wear more green and to induce starlets to wear more green. And guess what? The sales of as they became popular, the sales of Lucky Strike went through the roof. It was one of his most successful ad campaigns ever.
Interesting. See, now that is to me okay. Maybe and now maybe I'm getting tinfoil hatty, so I apologize. But that to me is very very interesting because that seems to draw a lot of parallels to um, what's going on right now in terms of games, right? Like if you think
Yeah,
about it,
yeah.
and
They're essentially inducing that there needs to be more women in games.
they are, and why, right? Like, and that's why I understand people have a hard time bringing academia into this, right? Especially academics say, well, we got nothing to do with this. But in my mind, the only thing that makes sense is academia, right? Why? Well, if we agree cultural studies are definitely the redheaded stepchild of sciences, right? In academia, you kind of need more women, right? Because you need women to be oppressed. You know what I mean? And you need that narrative that there is oppression in video games so that it legitimizes what you're trying to publish. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, that's Bernays 101 right there. You induce a reason to get the public to buy into what you're selling. Which is exactly what PR's job is. You induce the people out there to buy into what you're saying.
So why do they? So then, and I guess this is a question I struggle with, even though in my mind I think I know. but I'm not positive. Why do they need us to buy into it, right? In my mind, once again, because I have a hard time detaching academia from it, or academia, however you want to pronounce it, it all comes down to tenure and grants and all that, right? Like they need to be bought, they need their ideas bought into so that they can be, ha ha ha, Jesus Christ. Please don't use the Lord's. I'm not religious. I'm not even going to give you a hard time for that. um, it all comes down to tenure, right? Once you got tenure, you can start doing your real work. You know what I mean?
It, it comes down to grants. It comes down to tenure. It comes down to, oh God.
What did I miss?
For some reason, it's my shit's freaking out. I don't know what it is.
My shit broke out. Freaked
Oh,
out earlier.
yeah. And now I just lost my train of thought. Hang on. What the? Oh, I know what it is. It's my.
Uh, did I lose you?
Yeah, sorry about that. Gotta love the fucking Logitech keyboards because they freak out like that whenever you put a video up.
I don't know. I'm just on a little tiny MacBook.
I got a Logitech G19. It popped up the YouTube video, so that's where the sound was coming from. But anyway,
Gotcha.
um, I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. And the more money they can get, the more legitimacy they get. The legitimacy they get, the louder voice they get.
Exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Malky says it's a laughably convoluted explanation. I don't know if it is all that convoluted, right? Legitimize your voice, you get more money, you are more legitimate, right? Like, it's all about money, about why people want women in games. It's not about people wanting women in games. It's about forcing the narrative that there are no women in games and that the women that are in games are oppressed. It's not about me or Jerry or anybody else on this chat or on Gamergate or anywhere in the world about wanting women in games, right? You can want women in games. It's about the narrative that women in games are oppressed. At least
Well,
in my take.
I mean, if you drag, yeah, and I know she's been refuted by Thunderfoot, but if you drag Anita Sarkeesian into it, you see that side trying to come in, and once again, these are all my kind of opinions. I mean, there's a lot of women in games. If you actually look below the surface, there's a lot.
Oh, there are. In fact, well,
As
one
a
of
matter of fact, there are more women coming into academia now than there are men.
and yeah, which is why when somebody in academia calls me privileged, I laugh, right? Because yeah, I'm white, but I also have no education. Isn't education considered a privilege? You know what I mean? So
I
I find
think it.
that
I
funny.
think it. I think it increases the level of privilege you have.
Oh, is it a scale? Can I have a
Yes.
chart?
I don't know where it is, but I bet there is one.
Facetious, right? I don't really care.
I haven't checked Tumblr because I don't have one, so there's probably one out there somewhere. No, I know there is because Yahtzee Croshaw mentioned this on one of his YouTube videos of Let's Drown Out. There is a test on Tumblr, I believe, to see how much privilege you have.
Oh, I got to take that
I
test.
gotta find it somewhere too.
I got to take that test. But what was I going to say? It, because it bugs us that there aren't many women in games. Academia does not equal games. You are right. Academia does
Yeah.
not equal games. However, academia appears to have a hand in the indie game industry right now. And I say appear, I don't say they do, right? Even though my personal belief is they do. I don't have hard enough facts to back that up, so I won't say they definitely do. But they appear to have a hand in games right now.
And at least as far as if you've read the Fishbowl chat, they want to manipulate the market towards them, and they want to do that by bypassing peer review.
Academia has a lot of, yeah, you're right, Blake, they do. Now you get to peer review. That is something Sargon talks a lot about, and Sargon's a smart man, but I don't know if he understands what they are.
Well, no, because I'll tell you firsthand, peer review sucks
Sure, it does.
because it's everybody in academia that ever looks at your stuff basically trying to poke holes in everything you do, and it sucks. And the more holes they poke, the less legitimate you come out of it with.
But isn't that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And and I hear Sargon, and Sargon's been a big proponent of this, pushing the whole they want to kill peer review. And I don't know if he understands why they not that they want to kill peer review, but they kind of view peer review as an enemy. And I don't know if he gets why they view it as the enemy, right? It's not the enemy because it's peer review and it's slow and all that, right? Like, it's the enemy because it's harder to legitimize bullshit when you have 5 or 6 or 8 other people that are experts in your field looking at your paper.
Absolutely, it is, because if you've ever seen someone go up for their doctorate, they have to go through this phase called the dissertation, where you basically write this gigantic paper, like 40 to 50 pages, and you're basically writing out a theory and defense of your theory in it, and then you bring it to a board, and you have to sit there and defend it, which is essentially what peer review is. You take your theory and you take your theory, your experiment, all the data you gathered, and you defend it.
Which is what you should do, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why they have such a problem with it, right? Because how do you collect data on culture? You know what I mean? Like, you can collect data, but like you said, humans are fallible. You know what I mean? So how good is your data anyways? You know what I mean?
I mean, it's even in political science. Anybody who's in political science tell you public opinion sways with the wind.
Of course.
I mean, that's why, because there's even theories about agents, and when I say agents, I mean people working in government. Why we put them there? Like, we want elites in government because they're slow to change, or they're slow to change. They actually might know what's best for us, so let's let them act on their own. Versus the progressive view, which is the real progressive view, by the way, of I want to hear what my people want, and I want to put what my people want in action.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at what Malky said, and I'm thinking about something else at the same time, so now I'm getting scatterbrained. It doesn't have much to do with how many women are in games.
Yeah, that he's right, or he, she, Zim, Zer, whatever the pronouns they want us to use are. Yeah, it's not how many in there. It's how many of them fit the consistent narrative that they have pushed out. And if you don't fit the consistent narrative, then you're oppressing them.
Yeah, which is, I guess, well, that's kind of how it needs to be, right? In order for that narrative to work, they need to be oppressed. In my belief, and this is my belief and my belief only, and it probably is founded in very few facts. Those that are in power, maybe somebody like Lee Alexander, and I say in power, she's only in power in that at one point or another she had a giant megaphone, like she liked to remind us all about, right? I don't know if she really wanted women in games, because the more women in games they have, the less their narrative makes sense. Well, you know what I mean?
I don't think she wanted more women in games specifically. What I think she wanted, and once again, this is not based in any sort of fact, in my personal opinion, she wanted more women with their narrative in games.
Yeah, because I mean, if you had truly 50-50, right? 50% of the game developers, designers, whatever, were men and 50% were women, chances are not all 50% are going to fit with your view, right? So you need to keep that number small, and those that are there need to buy into your view so that narrative continues to hold true.
Yeah, and essentially they'll blackball anybody who doesn't fit it.
Yeah, which is problematic.
Which is why you see stuff like dames making games, which is why you see organizations like feminism or feminists in games and stuff like that.
Yeah, where did this whole feminist? I almost said feminist shit, but it's not feminist shit, right? Like, equality for everybody's good, so I don't want to call it feminist shit. But when did this whole radical feminist movement, when did that seemingly get into academia, right? Like, when did that happen?
Well, as I think as the liberal movement pushed in, and this is my opinion once again, as the liberal academic movement kind of pushed in, and the conservative voices were pushed out, the radicals now had the ability to kind of come in with them and blend in. You know, they blended in for a while, and now that they have come in, they have a platform.
Which brings us back to Gamergate and Digra, right? A platform.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Digra is, right? Like, Digra as an org is harmless. Digra as an org, as an organization, is actually probably a good thing, right? Like, critical eyes on games is probably a good thing.
Absolutely, it legitimizes gaming even further as an art form.
Exactly. But having Digra as a platform that radicals can use to speak from and use as some sort of backing force, that is the problem with Digra, right?
Yeah, it's well, it's like what Sargon kind of showed in his last video. It was as Mia Consalvo got the chair, more and more radical voices began to move in, and it began to, once again, opinion, it began to look more like a dictator's cabinet than look like an academic cabinet.
Exactly. And one thing I hear a lot, and those that are watching that know that I've had a lot of chats with ASCII Robot or Robot Parking, right? We've had a lot of
Mm-hmm.
chats with Robot Parking, and he's a big academic, and his view's always been same with Pixie Jenny's, but academics argue with each other, right? That's
Yeah,
what academics do.
we're
But when
supposed
I
to.
look at Digra and I look at like the fishbowl, and I talk to people from Digra, I don't get the feeling that they do argue with each other, right? That they do question each other's views.
Well, they all kind of have a common thread that they believe. It's just where they believe that games are an art, or games are an art, or games deserve to be studied. That's their common thread that brings them together. The question they ask is, why are they an art form, or what can we do to or the other question is, what can we do to further it?
But see, that whole thing doesn't make sense. That whole art form and the way they look at art doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think Kane is here, and that's too bad because maybe you guys know what I'm talking about. But there's this theory, or sorry, I was burping and hiccuping at the same time. There's this thing that, and I don't know if it's a theory or what it is, that basically says art has no influence on culture and culture has no influence on art. Do you know
Which
what I'm
is
talking about?
which the opposite's true.
The opposite's true.
Yeah, I would argue that the opposite is true because one of the most respected art forms right now is still is Picasso, and you look at something like Guernica, which was painted painted about the Spanish Civil War.
All right, let me rephrase that because maybe I'm looking through the old chat logs and maybe I got it wrong. What Kane said in I'm gonna keep looking for the link because I know it's here somewhere. That art has no influence over culture, meaning art cannot sway what people do. Is what I think he meant if I'm reading what he wrote right. Right, like art can so people, and this is all in relation to games causing sexism. His argument was art doesn't, and art doesn't cause somebody to act one way or another.
I don't think it causes anybody to act specifically, but it can change the cultural narrative.
Can it?
Mm, I would have to dig in and do some more stuff, but I think it can. I think it has at least some degree of influence.
How? and the way
Yeah, that's like I said. I'm gonna have to dig in more and fortify my position in that, just to argue that. But
because I'm sitting like philosopher Peter from Family Guy, and I'm
yeah,
going, how? Why? Because I have a hard time with that, right? But if
yeah,
you believe that, right, if you believe that, then it's not a far leap to say a video game is a cultural artifact. But I don't believe it is.
Mm,
Yes, art is a reflection of what a
yeah.
culture already thinks. Not. I don't even know if I believe that.
Yeah. Hang on.
Um, and here's why I say that. And maybe this does happen at some subconscious level, maybe even some subatomic level, right? Something that's far deeper than I ever want to get into myself. But like when I'm sitting here and or when I was sitting here designing Patchwork Battles, and I wasn't going to say the name because I didn't want to plug it, but I guess I already effed that up. But when I'm sitting here designing my game and I'm writing my story, the last thing I'm thinking about is my world around me, right? I'm losing myself into this fantasy world, and I'm
Right.
trying to step outside of societal norms and cultural norms and do something different. You know what I
Right.
mean? And tell a different story. And if somebody looks at that game and says, what does this game say about Code Grit, right? What does Code Grit really feel about society?
Yeah, that's a little much.
And how has that hegemony influenced him in designing this game? I look at that and I go, bullshit, right? Like, no, you can't say that about something I created without at least asking me first. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Which is why I have a hard time saying art is a reflection of what culture already thinks, and I have a hard time saying video games um, are cultural artifacts. I don't. Same thing with like movies. I don't know. I look at a movie like Transformers. Is that really like? Does that really speak to our current culture?
We like explosions.
But is that a cultural
Yeah.
thing, right? Like,
I mean, it could be. I mean, if you really wanted to kind of dig in and have a discussion on art, which is not my forte, I will
not
say
either.
right now.
But as a hobby game developer slash designer, like I take offense with that. I'm gonna look at your video game and I'm gonna tell you what it means about you. Well, fuck you. You're not,
Yeah.
right? Like, I designed it. I know what it means about me, and I know the story I was trying to tell.
Yeah, and that's the I can't remember where. So I think it was a demotivator or something a long time ago, where it said it had a picture of what it may have been something that's like what the artist meant versus what the interpreter thought he meant, and it was like the window was blue and the artist wrote the artist's interpretation of the window was blue, while there was all this other stuff like, is it interpretation of sadness, is it interpretation of his life, is it interpretation of the world around him? No, the artist meant the window was fucking blue.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, and
Yeah.
that's why I have a hard time with cultural studies.
And I will say that that art does give a unique snapshot into culture at the time, if that's what you're going for.
Exactly, right? Like, you can look at an old pottery from Egyptian time, right? And you can maybe kind of glean what culture was like, right?
Yeah,
But
it's like we wouldn't have known about ISIS and not the rebel group, but the god Isis or the god Osiris or anything like that. We wouldn't have known anything about that.
exactly. But at the same token, it could also be something that Charlie Manson etched in a rock. You know what I mean? And it can mean absolutely nothing, just crazy dribble.
Yeah,
So I have a hard time with the assumption that art is always a reflection on culture. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
um, compare art from different cultures, and you can see the influence of culture pretty clearly. Look at shows from, say, Japan versus U.S., and you can see the clear impact of their culture on how they go about their art. Sure.
yeah,
Um, I suppose you're right. And I
yeah.
suppose if I were to do that, I would make the assumption that all Japanese like lolicon. Um,
Yeah, that's a horrible stereotype, but hell, I mean,
and that's why I said it. That's one of the worst stereotypes out there. And I know that's
yeah,
not true, but I still wanted to say it just because lolicon's an awesome word. Um, but that's ultimately why I have a hard time with the way a lot of these cultural studies view things, and specifically video games, because not everything is a reflection on somebody's opinion of something, you know. And I struggle with that, right? And I struggle with the whole hate. I'm gonna say hatred, even though that's probably too strong. Yes, I'm with you. I also have a hard time with it because they seem to hate, and like I said, I know that's a strong word, but I'm gonna use it anyways.
yeah,
Capitalism, um, and that they seem to have a problem with capitalism. And maybe that's because I've benefited so greatly from capitalism, right? Like I benefited from being uneducated yet putting in the work and
Well, and yet they've
job,
and yet they've benefited more than we have.
which is weird, right?
Yeah, that just it seems that they have benefited because you look at you look at where the voices came from. They seem to hate capital. Well, they don't really seem to hate capitalism, but they're trying to drive forward this weird narrative that capitalism is, that one. I've just lost what I was going to say. Son of a bitch. But it seems like they come from these very wealthy, well-to-do kind of, backgrounds, and yet they're pushing a narrative forward that is almost vehemently anti-capitalist.
Yeah, and I can't figure it out. You know what I mean?
It's the new counterculture. I'd hate to say that, but I mean,
So would I, right? I
yeah.
would hate to label that as a counterculture.
Because if anything, something like punk is counterculture.
Yes.
Yeah.
But like I look at somebody like Pixie Jenny, for instance, right? Did you listen to her on with Sargon? And
I did, and her argument was just nothing but a giant Kafka trap. It was just nothing but bait.
yeah, that's exactly what that was. And I actually don't remember now if she mentioned it on Sargon's chat or in one of the chats I've had with her, or something I saw on Twitter. But she was talking about the problems with capitalism, right, and how it basically reinforces its hegemony. But she's going to fucking Oxford University.
Well,
You know what I mean?
She's
got some money behind her.
She's partly right about from a political standpoint. She's partly right about the hegemony thing, because, well, think about it. There's been a few great Western hegemonies. I can't think of any past this one, but I know the British used to be the hegemony back in the colonial days, and then during post-World War II, the United States kind of became it. Now it's kind of changing again. Maybe. The United States still holds a very big position of power, but some would argue that it's shifting to China.
And I would agree with that argument, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. But just...
But my point was, right, whether she's right or wrong, she was arguing against it, yet she's going to Oxford, right? So I don't know much about the UK educational system, but I would have to assume Oxford is money.
Oxford's like the equivalent of the Ivy League here in the United States.
Yeah, so money.
Money, either two ways. Either her family is very wealthy, or she is incredibly intelligent, and that is the only. She is incredibly intelligent, and she's going there on a full ride, and that's. There could be other mitigating factors and stuff like that, but that's, and I don't know. I'm not an expert in the UK educational system either, so I can't really say. That's my opinion, though.
And yeah, and I was agreeing with you, right? Because a lot of these academics I do know, right, like that I know that I'm close to, that are either in my family or closely surrounded me, most of them have gone to Ivy League schools, right? And I would say a good half of them carry this. I'm going to say SJW, even though I know it's wrong, right? But they seem to carry this view, right? This capitalism is bad, culture is bad, everything's oppressive. And I'm trying to figure out where it comes from, right? Like, why does it seem like a lot of these people coming out of Ivy League schools are carrying this torch?
Now, you really want to see a social justice warrior, you look at someone like Martin Luther King, or you look at someone like Malcolm X.
Well, sure.
That was the old. As far as the new one goes, the first time I ever even heard the term SJW was last summer. I decided to get into some. I decided to drop some weight and get into shape. And for motivation, I'd read this subreddit called "Our Fat People Stories," and that was the very first time I ever heard the term SJW in my life. Say again?
Did they oppress you?
God, no. As a matter of fact, it was motivated because that brought me into the idea that there was a thing called I think it was the narrative that society is oppressing fat people because airplane seats are too small, or I can't use the scooters because some, elderly person or some ableist shitlord could use it. And that even brought me in the idea of, reading more of those, the idea of trans fat, which is a real thing. I didn't know it was until I read that stuff, but it is a thing.
What is it?
I can be 5'6" and 120 pounds, but my internal weight is 300.
Okay.
You think I am kidding? And no, it's
I'm
absolutely
gonna
true.
say okay. Right? Like I don't know what to say other than probably to unnice things, right? And I don't want to pick on anybody.
Nah, but
Maybe I do, but not if they're not in front of me. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Oh fuck! Now I lost my train of thought. I had something I wanted to say.
But as far as the social justice warrior community in where I'm at, I've not seen it. I really haven't. Like the closest thing I even saw to a hashtag movement around here was Coney 2012, way back then, and that was the only one I've seen since.
So you know what's funny? I adjunct at University of Connecticut, UConn.
Okay.
And I've kind of been pushed out, which is funny too that I adjunct there and I have no college degree, but that was actually total nepotism because I happen to know the dean. So like, that was total fucking nepotism, and I admit it. But anyways, I adjunct at UConn, and I basically got pushed out of my engineering department, where now I teach my course online because of this shit. Right? Like I refuse to buy into this. You need to do more with your class to make women want to join it. Well, no. If women want to join my class, they'll join my fucking class. If they don't want to, they won't. Right? Like
well, they also have quote. Well, I think they do have actual quotas for that stuff.
They do. They do.
Yeah.
But I refuse to play that game. You know what I mean? Like I refuse to say, I'm going to teach about. I don't even know a good example. Right? It was just the way my curriculum was written.
Oh.
To make more women want to join, and it's like no, like this is engineering. You know what I mean? Like this is what you do.
If you want to be an engineer, great. That's fine. Come join the class, put the work in, and do it.
Exactly. And so for me, like this has become semi-personal, though I don't really care. I'm very happy to teach my course online. I'm very happy to never go into the university. I happen to work from home all day, so to be able to do actually 3 jobs because I also tutor on the side too. To be able to do all 3 from home, maybe they did me a favor. You know what I mean? But yeah, like it seems to mostly come from Ivy League schools, though it's slowly trickling down into some of these second-tier schools. You know what I mean? Not the second tier, but
hell, some of these people would even say that San Francisco is the hub of this stuff.
sure,
That's an opinion too.
it is though, and that's maybe unfair to say. But when you look at it, San Francisco's always been very radically progressive, right?
Yeah, and I've got no problem with progressivism. I've got no problem with, wanting to help bring somebody up that's actually oppressed. That's fine.
It's creating the oppression that I have a problem with.
Well, it's not just that. It's, yeah, you want to be equal. Okay, come do the work with us and be on that level. That's fine. But,
Go ahead.
it's essentially like, the modern feminism movement with misandry and thing. It's, some people would argue it's misandry in disguise and whatnot. Like, base mom Christina Summers would say. Modern feminism isn't good because it's not healthy. It's not really feminism.
It's not. It's misandry in disguise, and I got no problem saying that, and I'll own it. And I'm the farthest thing from a men's rights advocate. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh God, me too.
that's not me, but the radical femmes that have kind of taken over the internet, it is misandry in disguise. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say taken over, but they're definitely getting a louder voice.
Yeah. Maybe taken over is the wrong word. But you knew what I was trying to say, right?
Yeah,
More and more voice is getting louder.
Thank God for Tumblr, am I right?
Thank God for Tumblr. That's unfair because there is some good artsy stuff on Tumblr.
There's some good artsy stuff. There's some good fandom stuff. It's just, I think it was Kane showed me the video of the introduction to Tumblr, and it was, all these stuff is great, except if you're a cis white male. And I'm like, oh God, here it comes. Because I am a cis white male.
So am I.
I know, I am who I am, and I've owned that.
And that's a problem I have too, right? Like,
Wait, I'm the villain? I'm oppressing someone?
you are, apparently.
Like,
Um,
what?
that's another big problem I have, and this is something I've seen a lot reading into Marxism and specifically cultural Marxism, is they tend to blame the people that are quote unquote oppressing them, even if the people that are oppressing them have no desire to oppress them or aren't even trying to oppress them. You know what I mean? Like the whole cis white male thing. Well, you're at fault because you're a cis white male.
Yeah,
No, I was born this way. I've done nothing to oppress you other than be born. You know what I mean? Like I have a real fucking hard time with that.
I think I've posted this. I've posted this before, and I could try to dig it out again. It was something once again I saw on Reddit. It was a screen grab, I think, from Poll, and we all know how anybody who's watching this knows how anti-SJW Poll is.
Well, yes.
But it was a grab of someone who talked about when they were actually in the social justice warrior side, and it sounded. And someone actually said about it. This sounds exactly like the cycle of abuse.
You know, actually, I wanna talk about that for a minute. I was talking with somebody else about maybe not the cycle of abuse within the SJWs, but well, I'll start by telling a story. I have a very, very good friend of mine who was bad things were done to her by family members, right? Sexual
Right.
things. I'm gonna leave it at that, right? But bad things were done to her by family members, and she has this way about her where you cannot question her, right? Um, you cannot do anything to go against her without her becoming offended by it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because of the way she was brought up. And we were just making the connection to a lot of these SJW types where they seem to come from some sort of troubled place, whatever that trouble is, right? I'm not trying to say they were all
Hmm.
sexually molested or they were all raped or they were all not at all, right? But they all seem to come from this kind of troubled place where if you question them, you automatically condone the abuse they have suffered, whatever that abuse is.
Um, who was it that actually talked about that? Because I know there was a streamer who is with who would identify themselves with gamer. I think it was actually King of Pole who brought up the example of Lee Alexander. I think because like they were saying, she always has a drink in her hand. She always has something going on, and I don't want to accuse her of being an alcoholic or anything, but it's
Exactly.
kind of weird about that.
And if you think about it, and you look at it from the standpoint of a troubled, and I'm going to say a troubled past or some sort of troubled spot,
You
they
know,
do tend to act like they come from some sort of troubled spot. You know what I mean?
right. It's something they're obviously dealing with, that they haven't got over with. They haven't either come to terms with, with themselves, or they, just it's something psychologically. It has to be because I've looked at a lot of the social justice movement, the modern one at least, and it's like, nah, I don't get it, and I'm not going to kind of fit your narrative because I'm a human. I have my own opinions, and then now, oh, I'm the oppressor. What? No, I'm disagreeing with you. I'm not an oppressor.
Exactly. I'm
I'm
just
I'm
disagreeing.
trained. Academia trains you. Real academia trains you to disagree. It trains you to question. It trains you to do all this other stuff. It trains you to poke holes in theory.
But they don't for whatever reason, and it's astronomically frustrating.
Yeah, and I hate it. I will vehemently say that I hate any movement that refuses, that absolutely refuses you kind of doubting it or questioning it or trying to at least discern truth from it. Even
But isn't that I'm gonna say this, and I know it's incorrect, but I know the link I'm trying to make in my head. But isn't that ideology sort of a Marxist theory thing, right? Like,
it's kind of academics. That's kind of academics in general. You ask why.
no, not the asking why. The whole if you disagree with it, you are oppressed. You are somehow accepting the oppression, and you are somehow condoning the oppression.
It may be. I don't know. I'd have to. look.
Because
I
some
definitely
of
would
the
have to.
stuff I've read, and I could probably pull out of, I don't know if it's in my notebook or what, because I actually happen to be, there is a somebody in my family, direct family, who buys into Marxist very, very much, and she's made a lot of comments like that to me, and she's pointed me to a lot of literature that tends that makes me believe that if you accept it, right, and disagree, and by disagreeing with it, you accept it. I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? Like if you disagree with it being there, you are somehow accepting of it being there.
Well, I think it's more of, and how can I put this?
Yeah, I'm putting it all
If
wrong, right? But I know in my head it makes sense.
if you disagree with it, if you disagree with the third wave feminist movement, and I'm using that as an example, then you are complicit in oppressing women.
Yes.
That's the gist of, I think, what you're trying to get at. If you're not agreeing with this movement, saying we're being oppressed, or saying that you agree with our narrative, therefore you are the enemy, and therefore you are oppressing us.
Exactly. And I guess complicit's the right word, right? Not accepting, but complicit. If you take any other stance other than fight, you are complicit. So therefore, you are helping to oppress me by not being willing to fight for me or
Right.
fight with me.
And that's exactly it. That's exactly what I was trying to say.
So, I mean, and I know Malky, I don't know if he's still in here or not, has had a hard time with us always saying, keep coming back to it being a Marxist thing, but I have a real hard time separating that. I have a real hard time separating cultural studies being heavily influenced in its infancy by very prominent Marxist theorists, right? And I have a hard time with cultural studies.
It has been. I mean, if it's in Europe, it's got a heavier Marxist influence.
Well, sure, obviously, right?
Because you look at the way the United States and even Canada kind of studies it, it's not as heavy.
It's not, but if you notice, and this is the funny part, if we bring Digra back into it, if you notice where a lot of these Digra, um, a lot of these big Digra chapters are, a lot of them are on the European side, the eastern side, right?
Yeah.
Finland and the UK and Australia. You know what I mean?
Uh, yeah. Well, because I've got no.
Australia is really not. I mean, it's eastern. It's far eastern than Europe, but
Yeah. Well, they come from the. What is that system? I can't think of it that the UK has. I really can't, but I know it's the particular system the UK had because we rebelled against the UK system. Australia kind of just declared independence and accepted the Westminster system. That's it. We didn't take the Westminster system, and the Australians kind of did.
yeah. But my point was, you mentioned, if it came from the UK, it's gonna, in the UK, it's obviously going to be more Marxist influence just because of where Marxism started, right?
Well, uh, not where it started, but in
Well,
Europe.
where it grabbed hold, right?
I mean, yeah, I mean, think about this. You said it was the Frankfurt School. That's
Yes.
where this came from. Well, think about in the 60s what was going on in Germany. It was split. It was East Germany versus West Germany, and where was Frankfurt actually at? I'm trying to think if it was in Eastern or Western Germany. Give me 1 second.
I was Googling it while you were talking.
Yeah.
Frankfurt School. I'm just going to type West Germany.
Frankfurt am Main, which is where it would be. Frankfurt am Main would be in West Germany, but it's still in that area where directly they had half of the country since the 40s had been communist.
Yes.
It was Soviet communist, which is a little bit different than pure communism, but still.
Which would make sense as to why, this way of looking at culture, why it would spawn there. You know what I mean? Like that.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It basically spawned out of a communist government. So I
Well,
get that.
not really communist government, but where
Well,
the influence was heaviest. Yeah.
yes, thank you. That's what I meant, right? Like this didn't come out of the government, but they they were living within a communist state, right?
Yeah.
And that's where they were operating.
At least halfway. I mean, the influence was definitely there.
Yes, yes. I guess you're right. At that time, well, but the Frankfurt School wasn't the '60s, right? That was more the '30s and '40s, which was far more.
Yeah, that was the 30s and 40s is when the communist influence was very heavy in Germany. As a matter of fact, that's what Hitler kind of wanted to root out, and he did.
He
Yeah,
did.
he didn't want the communist influence in there because that was a different narrative than the Nazi Party.
Though the Nazi Party in
They did it by very illicit means.
yes,
I mean, they did it with the Night of the Long Knives and stuff like that. They basically just burned down the Reichstag. I think they burned the Reichstag down, and just no, that's not how you go about it.
well, and to bring Godwin into this, the Nazi Party was actually one of the first to use cultural Marxism as an insult and a slur.
Oh boy.
It makes sense why they hate it, right? Why the other side, quote unquote, hates it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's the stigma of Marx being so heavily part of the Cold War in the United States. I mean, because I actually had to read the freaking Communist Manifesto as a history class assignment and compare it to John Stewart's On Liberty, which that I don't wish On Liberty on anyone because that book is very long, it is very dry, whereas the Communist Manifesto is much more passionate and much more interesting read, and well, not more interesting, but more fun to read, if that.
So, to come back to academia, one thing you tend to hear a lot, at least I tend to hear a lot when I interact with these academics, like Pixie or Robot Parking, is critical theory, right? Like, that seems to be something they float around a lot. You know what I mean? Why is critical theory in games bad? You know what I mean? I don't know if you've seen that question asked, but I've seen it asked a F-ton.
Remind me what critical theory is.
Well, I was getting to that, right? And
Okay.
I was going to say one of the reasons I have a hard time separating Marxism from all this is critical theory really came out of the Frankfurt School in the neo-Marxist philosophy. So let me get to the Wikipedia, and I can tell you what.
I got it up right here. Critical theory is a school of thought that stresses the reflective assessment and critique of society and culture by applying knowledge from the social sciences and humanities. It basically saying I'm sort of complicit in critical theory, but especially if I go into something like comparative politics, I'd be knee deep in critical theory.
Oh, most definitely. It can be described as a theory founded upon critique. Thus, the theorist Max blah 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 described the theory to liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them. That is a very interesting phrasing in a way of looking at critical theory, in the critique. To liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them. Think about that, right?
Yeah.
And then, this goes on to say, as I just said, in philosophy, the term critical theory describes the neo-Marxist philosophy of the Frankfurt School, which was developed in Germany in the 1930s. Frankfurt theorists drew on the critical methods of Karl Marx and Sigmund Freud. Critical theory maintains that ideology is a principal obstacle to human liberation.
Well, now here's the one that we're kind of running into in Gamergate when it comes to Gamergate and feminism relations, because the third wave feminism relations are in this postmodern, and this is gonna be a little bit of a long read, but I'm gonna read this out if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Postmodern critical theory. While modernist critical theory, as described above, concerns itself with forms of authority and injustice that accompanied the evolution of industrial and corporate capitalism as a political economic system, postmodern critical theory politicizes social problems by situating them in historical and cultural context to implicate themselves in the process of collecting and analyzing data and to relativize their findings, meaning itself as seen as unstable due to the rapid transformation in social structures. As a result, the focus of research is centered on local manifestations rather than broad generalizations. That's fine. You want to take a look at things, on, an individual basis. But now, this is continued. Postmodern critical research is also characterized by crisis of representation, which rejects the idea that the research work is an objective depiction of a stable other. Instead, many postmodern scholars have adopted alternatives that encourage the reflection about the politics and poetics of their work. In these accounts, the embodied collaborative, dialogic, and improvisational aspects of qualitative research are clarified. The term critical theory is often appropriated when an author, perhaps most notably Michael Foucault, works within sociological terms, yet attacks the social or human sciences, thus attempting to remain outside those frames of inquiry. And Jean Brouillard has also been described as a critical theorist to the extent that he was an unconventional and critical sociologist. This appropriation is similarly causal, holding little or no relation to the Frankfurt School.
That sounds familiar.
Definitely familiar.
Right? And again, this is why I personally have a hard time and I think a lot of Gamergate guys and girls and people who have research and stuff, this is why I think they have a hard time separating Marxism from this whole equation.
At least cultural Marxism, yeah, because cultural Marxism is an ungainly beast to try to understand.
No, Marxism itself is, right?
Yeah, Marxism as a whole is, and even critical Marxism can be somewhat daunting.
But
at least
I think makes sense to people.
Yeah, I mean, at least for the average person, cultural Marxism would be hard to stand, or hard to understand.
You think so? Cultural Marxism would be hard?
I'm saying, and I'm making kind of a sweeping generalization here, I know that's bad, but for the average person, yeah, it's hard to understand, mainly because they don't, nobody wants to read something about Marx.
Well, that's true. And you're right. In order to understand cultural Marxism, you at least have to have some, at least broad general understanding of Marxism and Karl Marx and all that, right?
Right.
You can't just say, I understand cultural Marxism, but I don't understand Marxism.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, if you look at cultural Marxism, it really is just taking Karl Marx's economic views of the world and dumping them on the culture.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. And there's nothing wrong with, well, I hate to say there's nothing wrong with it, but it's been vetted long enough to where it's gained legitimacy, which is fine. It can be as legitimate as it wants to be.
Is it legitimate, though? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, as far as in political theory and political economic theory, it absolutely is legitimate.
Marxism, right? As a whole, yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking cultural Marxism. I don't know if it's legitimate yet. And I say that based on the things academics have said about cultural studies.
Cultural studies is a funny thing, really. I mean, because I can't say that I've ever taken a women's studies course. I can't say that I've taken, a feminism study course or anything like that. But as someone who is incredibly close to the social sciences, I am seeing that kind of mentality creep in slowly.
Really?
Well, yeah, because think about it. Cultural studies are firmly rooted in social science, and it's starting to worm its way in, especially in sociology. Sociology is the easiest one to get.
Well, sociology I would buy into, right? But yeah. How is it squirming its way into POSI?
I don't think it's into political science as of yet, but it can get its way in there. I've personally not seen it, but since it is in kind of, and this is another generalization, so I think it has its foot in the door with sociology, which means it could possibly get its foot into even more doors as it kind of grows.
I would argue it's already in at least politics from a general populist standpoint. And the reason I say this is the belief of, Marxists is, for instance, voting is just another way for the hegemony to maintain power, right?
Right.
Voting doesn't really, in a Marxist view, voting doesn't do anything, right? It just gives the appearance of doing something, right? You know what I mean? And you see that being reflected in America far more commonly these days. That sentiment that voting isn't really their voice, and it's really not. They really don't have any power over anything.
Well, here's the funny thing when it comes to voting, and this is where I'm going to drag political science back into this. Usually the people that vote are the most passionate about their views. That's the key. It's like the average person, they'll vote in a presidential election, but they won't vote in a midterm election, or they won't vote in a referendum, or they won't vote in. They'll vote for the big things, but they won't vote for the little things.
Of course. But I don't know. Well, I mean, I do know why that is. That's because they're not, passionate enough to care, right? Or
Yeah.
care enough to go out of their way to vote. But a Marxist would believe voting is just the hegemony maintaining control, right? It gives this appearance of
It
power
it
to
gives
the
it gives the bourgeoisie an opinion.
that doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. It gives them a voice to outlet that.
Yes,
And if it's bad, then their voice doesn't need to be there.
yes. I think I'm saying the same thing. Sorry, I'm reading through my notebook, and I maybe am misunderstanding my notes. But the belief is it gives, at least my understanding of this is, from a Marxist theory, is that voting system gives the lower class, right, anybody under the oppressors, an outlet to speak their voice, even though their voice is going unheard, right? But
It
it
gives
gives them that outlet.
Yeah, it gives them, if they are truly oppressed, it gives them the illusion that it's being heard.
Exactly. It allows them to speak into a deaf person's ear,
Yeah.
basically. They're not listening, but and my point was maybe it is spilling over into politics, and eventually political science, because I hear that far more commonly amongst the laymen these days, right? Like, why bother voting? It doesn't matter anyways.
Yeah, and to a certain, well, you look at it statistically and you say one vote's not going to matter, and that's true. It's really not. I mean,
Haven't seen that movie?
oh, the swing vote. Oh God, that was horrible.
Sorry.
Well, no, that's the thing. It's even like.
Well, one vote doesn't matter. One vote will never matter.
Yeah, I mean,
There's far too many people who vote for one vote to matter.
Because let me actually pull up. Well, let me actually do a little bit of a quick math. How much, what one vote actually means.
Nothing.
Let's see. Divided by 300 million. Yeah, it's so low that the calculator can't quantify it. One vote literally is, 3.3 e to the 9th percent.
Yeah. So nothing.
One vote, but many votes matter. I mean, that's what, that's what's. I'm losing my train of thought tonight. It's bad. I'm doing some work for international relations, which is my class tomorrow, about actors in international relations and stuff like that. So my mind's kind of been flowing with that, but.
Well, don't worry. We're gonna wrap up soon, anyways, because
yeah,
it's getting late on the East Coast, as you know.
Yeah, I know. I'm on the East Coast too, so.
Not to get off subject too far with this political stuff, but your vote does matter when you start talking about electoral college, in what those who are elected are supposed to do, not what they do, but what they're supposed to do.
Right.
They're supposed to speak for their population. They don't, but they're supposed to.
Yeah, because that brings up the elitist versus the populist thing. The elitist somehow inherently knows what they're doing versus the populist, which listens to people and has them tell them what they need to do.
Yeah.
You put your faith in the elitist because they know what they're doing. Or they give the appearance of they know what they're doing versus the populist who says, "Hey, tell me what to do."
Yeah. Which I guess is sort of their problem, right?
Sort of. The progressivism that they're claiming is not true progressivism, in this person's opinion, because progressivism started way back in the 1800s with guys like Eugene Debs and whatnot, wanting the worker to have a greater voice than he already had.
And I would argue he was successful, right?
Somewhat. Unions became more popular in the North. They kind of stayed out of the South a little bit, but
I was going to use unions as my argument, by the
yeah,
way.
because unions are still kind of a funny thing, but in the South they didn't really take hold, but in the North they kind of did. He ran for president once and lost. Eugene Debs did. I think he lost to,
right? At least pretty badly.
I know he lost to McKinley, who was actually, I think, somewhat backed by guys like John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie and all those, the
Illuminatis of the United States.
The biggest, well, not really the Illuminati, but the juggernauts at the time.
Well, I say that only because when people start talking about Illuminati, one of the very first names you hear is Rockefeller.
Yeah, because he wasn't Illuminati. He just had wealth.
Yeah, I'm aware. I was making a joke, right?
Yeah, I know. I hate to do that sometimes. I just hate to deconstruct. You just deconstruct jokes. It's a bad habit of mine.
It is. Yeah. So this whole, and this is something I guess I struggle with, and why I will never call myself a progressive is there's seemingly no end to being progressive, right? Once something changes, you are then even more progressive about something else. You know what I mean? Like,
with modern progressivism, yeah.
There seems to be no end to it.
Yeah, because essentially you can keep pushing an issue. You can keep pushing for someone to have a greater voice. And essentially progressivism is now kind of bogged down in the fight over who's got the best voice.
Yeah. I see. Once again, I struggle with that stuff.
And I don't blame you. I kind of do too, because I try to call myself a progressive, because let's face it, I'm a left. I'm center left. I lean more towards the the Democratic Party. I favor kind of helping the poor get elevated and stuff like that. But I also kind of believe that you put in the work you put in, you get the deserved response.
See, you're the exact. I guess you're maybe my mirror, because I'm center right.
Yeah, well, most of the United States is center right too. I mean,
that's where I fall.
Yeah.
Though I like to call myself, and I know why I'm center right, but I generally consider myself fiscally conservative and socially liberal.
Yeah, well, that's the United States in a nutshell: fiscally conservative, socially liberal.
Yes, which ironically, it's now been hijacked by the Tea Partyists, but that would be to some degree a libertarian, right? It wouldn't be left wing or right wing, right? It would. That's really like a libertarian view. That whole movement, that whole political thing has been hijacked.
Yeah, because the core essence of libertarianism, is favoring more state control. Let's let the federal government shrink even farther than the Republican Party wants it to, and let the states have a lot more control than they do now.
Which is why true libertarianism will never work.
We tried it once. We did. It was the Articles of Confederation, because the states were absolutely sovereign and the federal government was co-equal with the states.
Yes, and how would that work out?
We threw it out and wrote the Constitution.
Exactly. Which, I generally consider myself a libertarian, but I always preface it, or at least follow it up by saying, but I understand a true libertarian state won't work, right? A truly free market won't work.
No, because essentially you'll have the monopoly hijack it and run away with it.
Yeah, well, actually, I'll rephrase that. A true free market won't work in today's age, right?
God, no.
A true free market might work in a completely clean slate,
yeah.
Right?
In an ideal state, the free market is a good thing.
Yes.
But
from capitalism, it won't work.
Well, no, even in capitalism, it could work, because capitalism made the free market. It's just you throw in human interest, and that muddies the whole system.
Okay, I'm going to rephrase that even further.
Okay.
Coming from the current United States economic, we can't just say we're going to a 100% free market.
God no, no. I am on board with that 100%.
That won't work. If our slate was 100% clean, it might work. I don't know. I've never seen it attempted.
I don't think
Alive for 30 some odd years, but it might work, right?
potentially if in an ideal state, yes. And we're talking absolutely ideal.
Yeah, that would never happen anyways.
Nah, because because that's the funny thing about the free market. If you want it to be absolutely ideal, you have to kind of separate human interest from it.
Impossible.
Yeah, because I think it was because I mean even guys like who was it? I think it was Adam Smith talked about this thing called the invisible hand way back when capitalism was first kind of coming about in the UK. And the invisible hand is the idea that greed itself is a good thing. Because as you get greedy, you want your workers to perform better. Therefore, your workers will get better things if you do certain things for them, and they'll make you more money.
He might have a point.
He does. It's just you also have to believe. I'd have to read Adam Smith again. I think I actually have some of this stuff here, but I'd have to read over it again.
I mean, and now you're getting into an area I'm totally unqualified to speak to, which is economics, right? Like,
yeah, I'm economically unfit to do it too. So
I can't even control the economics of my household.
oh yeah, but
you know,
it's 12:30. I think we may need to call it a night because at least
do we want to wrap back? Do we want to circle everything back around real quick?
Yeah, let's go for that.
Back to Gamergate, cultural Marxism, academia, Digra.
We could try to do this streaming again on Friday, maybe.
Actually, that may work for me.
Because I know I get out of class at noon, and I could definitely swing that.
Friday evening would actually work for me for a second stream.
Yeah.
Only because my wife is making me go apple picking.
And hell with that, we could bring in even more people.
Yeah, because this was actually, I mean, we didn't get too much into Gamergate, which is kind of cool because this is the side of stuff I'm more fascinated with.
Yeah.
More fascinated with.
Yeah, it's now you're looking at causality, which is a whole different thing.
But that's the side that's fascinating to me, right? Like how, why do they think this way? And because in my mind, if I can understand why they think this way and where they're coming from, it becomes easier to get that point across, right? The point you're trying to make.
Oh, yeah.
You know, which is why I tend to view them as Marxists, whether it's right or wrong. It helps me at least understand partly where they're coming from. Yeah. I still don't get the whole gender war thing that they got going on. I don't know if I ever will, because I don't know where that comes from.
I don't either. It comes from the radical side, and someone like Based Mom could probably talk better about that.
Yeah, she won't want to talk to two nobodies, which is too bad, because I would love to understand. And not even so much the gender side, right? But then you get into like the whole transgender and now this is getting into nothing with Gamergate, but like the whole otherkin movement that seems to be a thing on Tumblr. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, it's just that's a quagmire.
How does all this play into oppression? I mean.
Yeah, and Tetra, we may actually say that for Friday because we're about to wrap up here.
Was there a question?
Yeah, hi, Tetra D20 in the chat. Talk about this culture thing where no one wants to be offended anymore, and that's true. It's that nobody wants to be offended anymore. Oh, I'm sorry, people are going to get offended.
Well, and Based Mom talked about that, right? That the whole self-esteem thing is now suddenly more important than your ability to succeed as a person in this society, right? Like
everybody gets a trophy.
Oh, don't even get me started on that.
Yeah, God.
But right, like, and I say don't get me started on that. You know, I played AAU soccer when I was younger, and if we didn't finish in the top 3 spots, we got fucking nothing, right? We got better luck next year.
I think Chris Titus put it best. The comedian Christopher Titus put it best in one of his stand-up special. I think it was Neverlution. He said, "You know what happens when we lost a game? We got pizza and shut the fuck up. That's exactly what we got."
And that he's right. That's exactly what we got. But now you get, well, like Tetra had said, nobody wants to be offended anymore. Nobody wants to have their feelings hurt. And actually, I will save this for Friday because I do have a piece of literature sitting upstairs next to my bed. In my pile of shit that talks specifically about this in relation to cultural hegemony, and in some ways related back to cultural Marxism, but not really. And this whole notion of feelings, and feelings being a form of oppression, right? If you hurt somebody's feelings, you are oppressing them. That's just a load of fucking bullshit. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know.
I don't know either. This is something we can tackle Friday.
It's something to think about. That would actually be a very fun topic. The whole notion of nobody wanting to be offended.
Mm-hmm.
It is only tangentially. I can't even talk now because it's getting late. Related to Gamergate, but that's okay.
So, I think we can call this wrapped up for tonight.
I think so.
All right, folks. Like we said, what time on Friday?
Let's do 9:30. Let's not do 10:30 again.
Yeah, definitely 9:30 on Friday. Say the time because we will be right back here doing this.
Talking about more stuff. Maybe we can get some more people to join in and talk about this fucked up bullshit.
White Knight. We'll actually we could delve into the White Knight syndrome stuff, but
Tetrad, we're going to do this Friday, and we're going to talk about both the things you mentioned because both these are awesome points.
Talk about that, talk about Gamergate, and talk about Digra and all this other stuff.
Definitely. Though, Digra, yeah. I just want to be careful with Digra just because people seem to be pushing this idea that they are a puppet master, and I just don't want to help that idea because they're not. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're a platform, but we could talk more about Digra.
Yeah, they're a construction company. They're not touting anything.
Well, they are.
The organization itself
is not.
But the people within it are.
Yes, that's the distinction I want to make. And we should also talk about Silver String Media.
Yeah.
At least why they're important, and maybe our opinion to Gamergate, into Digra.
And Code, I want to when we kill the stream, I want to grab a chat about something before we kill it for the night.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So we'll be back Friday.
Be back Friday 9:30 East Coast time.
East Coast 9:30 p.m. EST.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys. Yeah.
No problem.